The hook. This 4-year-old street urchin finds a millionaire and his newborn son abandoned in a flood. But what she does next is incredible. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your feedback is highly valued, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The murky water surging through the streets of Cedar Creek carried more than just mud and debris. That morning in March, as the rains transformed downtown into a chaotic sea, it also carried away the last vestiges of Serenity's former life. The 4-year-old watched from under the Main Street overpass as the floodwaters swallowed everything around her. Her small, bare feet trembling not only from the cold of the rising water. Having lived on the streets for 2 years, Serenity had learned to read the signs of danger. The roar of the rising water, the desperation in people's cries, the way abandoned cars began to float like broken toys. But nothing had prepared her for what she saw when the current brought a man unconscious, clutching something small and fragile to his chest. Alistair Beaumont, 45, owner of the largest furniture factory in the region, lay unconscious on the muddy bank near the farmer's market. His greying hair was plastered to his face with a mixture of blood and dirty water, and in his arms, protected by a soaked blanket, a newborn baby cried with a strength that seemed disproportionate to its size. Serenity didn't hesitate. Her survival instincts, sharpened by months of hunger and fear, screamed at her to move on, to seek shelter for herself. But something stronger pulled her towards those two strangers. Maybe it was the baby's cry, which echoed like a plea for help she knew all too well. Or maybe it was the way the man, even unconscious, kept his arms protectively around the child. Carefully, she approached from the side, her small feet slipping in the mud. The water was still rising, and in a few minutes, that place would be completely submerged. Serenity knew she had to act fast. First, she picked up the baby, who immediately stopped crying when he felt her small but firm arms. It was a boy, she realized, and despite being wet and scared, he seemed healthy. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, using the sweet voice she had learned from watching other mothers in the park. "Serenity's got you." Carrying the baby to the abandoned elementary school she used as shelter was a difficult task for a 4-year-old. Her arms ached, and several times she had to stop to readjust the weight. But Serenity was used to hardships. She had carried trash bags bigger than her in search of food, had walked miles under the scorching sun for clean water. The school was in a higher area, away from the reach of the waters. Serenity knew every corner of that dilapidated building. She knew where the leaks were less intense, where the wind didn't enter, where she could improvise a safe corner for the baby. She made a bed with pieces of cloth she had collected over the months and placed the boy there, protected from the cold and humidity. "I need to go back and get your daddy," she said to the baby, who watched her with big, curious eyes. "I won't be long." When she returned to the place where she had found Alistair, the situation had worsened. The water now covered almost the entire body of the man, and he remained unconscious. Serenity knew she couldn't carry him like she had done with the baby, but she also knew she couldn't leave him there to drown. That's when she had an idea. In the abandoned school, there was an old rope that she used to secure her few possessions. Running against time, she went back, grabbed the rope, and returned to the man. With a strength that would surprise any adult, she managed to pass the rope around Alistair's chest and began to pull him, inch by inch, away from the water. The process was exhausting. Her small muscles protested with every movement, and several times she felt like giving up. But every time she looked at the man's face, she thought of the baby who was waiting for him and found the strength to continue. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but were only 40 minutes, she managed to drag Alistair to a safer place, under an awning near the school. He was still unconscious, but breathing. Serenity checked if he had any serious injuries, and finding nothing more than a cut on his forehead, decided that she could leave him there for now. When she returned to check on the baby, he was awake and crying again. Serenity realized he must be hungry. She had no milk, but she had learned on the street that sugary water could help in emergencies. With a little of the sugar she had gotten the day before and rainwater she had collected in clean containers, she improvised a nutritious solution. "Shh, Carter," she said, giving a name to the baby because she felt he needed one. "Your big sister Serenity is here." It was during the second night, while she divided her time between caring for the baby and checking the man's condition, that Serenity realized they were being watched. A shadow moved among the trees near the school, always keeping a distance, but clearly interested in their movements. The fear she knew so well returned to tighten her chest. On the street, being watched rarely meant something good. It could be someone wanting to steal her few possessions, or worse, someone with intentions she preferred not to imagine. Instinctively, she picked up Carter and positioned herself to protect him from any threat. On the third day, when Alistair finally began to show signs that he was waking up, the mysterious person decided to reveal themselves. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a dirty and torn nurse's uniform. Her eyes were kind, but there was something desperate in her expression. "Please don't be afraid," the woman said, keeping her hands visible and her voice low. "My name is Beverly. I've been looking for them." Serenity clutched Carter to her chest, her small eyes fixed on the woman who approached slowly. Beverly Carter, 52, moved carefully, as if she knew that any sudden movement could make the girl run away with the baby. Her hands trembled slightly, and there were marks of dried tears on her tired face. "I won't hurt them," Beverly said, stopping a few feet away. "In fact, I came to help. I know who this man is, and I know why he was running." "Running from what?" Serenity asked, her voice small but firm. At 4 years old, she had learned that adult people didn't always tell the truth, especially when they were desperate. Beverly looked at Alistair, who was still semi-conscious, mumbling incomprehensible words. He was running from his own wife. "And I was running from her too." The nurse sat on the wet ground, keeping a respectful distance, and began to tell a story that made Serenity's blood run cold. Genevieve Beaumont, Alistair's wife, was not the gentle and dedicated woman she appeared to be in public. Behind the facade of an exemplary wife and successful businesswoman, she hid dark secrets that involved vulnerable children. "I worked as her private nurse for 3 years, Beverly explained, her voice low and filled with guilt. "At first, I thought she was just a rich, spoiled woman. But little by little, I began to notice strange things. Night visits from suspicious people, telephone conversations that she interrupted when I entered the room, documents that she hid quickly." Carter began to cry, and Serenity automatically rocked him gently, a maternal gesture that surprised even herself. Beverly watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "You have a way with babies," she commented. "Where did you learn that?" "You learn everything on the street," Serenity replied simply. "Keep talking. What did the bad woman do?" Beverly took a deep breath before continuing. 3 weeks ago, I discovered what she was really doing. Genevieve ran a private fertility clinic, but it was just a facade. In fact, she was selling babies to wealthy couples who couldn't adopt through legal means. She bought children from mothers in desperate situations and then forged all the documentation. The story became more disturbing with each word. Beverly told how she had discovered a secret room in the clinic filled with false documents, blank birth certificates, and illegal contracts. Even more terrible was the discovery that Carter, the baby that Serenity now protected, had been one of Genevieve's last merchandise. "Alistair found out everything when he returned from a business trip early," Beverly continued. "He overheard Genevieve on the phone, negotiating the sale of Carter to a couple from another state. When he confronted his wife, she said that the baby wasn't even his real son, that she had bought the child from a desperate young woman and forged all the documents to make Alistair believe he was the biological father." Serenity felt her heart race. The cruelty of that woman was something her childish mind struggled to understand. And then what happened? Alistair panicked. He grabbed Carter and fled the house, but Genevieve had people working for her. Dangerous men who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to recover the merchandise. He was running towards downtown when the flood hit him. Beverly explained that she had decided to flee as well after finding a document that implicated her. Genevieve had forged her signature on several false medical reports, making her an involuntary accomplice to the crimes. If I didn't run, she would blame me for everything when the scheme was discovered. Alistair groaned and tried to move, drawing the attention of the two. His eyes opened slowly, confused and unfocused. When he saw the baby in Serenity's arms, he tried to get up quickly, but the dizziness made him stagger. "Carter!" he cried, reaching out his arms. "Where's Carter?" "He's here. He's safe," Serenity said, approaching carefully. "I took care of him." Alistair looked at the girl as if he were seeing her for the first time. His eyes scanned the small, determined face, the disheveled hair, the dirty clothes, but the gentle gestures with which she held the baby. "Who are you? Where are we?" "My name is Serenity," she replied, "and you were drowning in the flood. I brought you to a safe place." Alistair tried to remember recent events, but his mind was foggy. Fragments of memories came and went like waves. The discovery about Genevieve, the desperate escape, the deafening noise of the water. But there were large gaps, as if someone had erased important pieces of his story. "I remember the water," he said slowly, "and holding Carter, but why were we there? Where were we running from?" Beverly approached cautiously. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm Beverly, your nurse. You suffered a head trauma. It's normal to have memory confusion." "Nurse? I don't have a nurse," he replied, frowning. "And why is Carter with this girl? Where's Genevieve?" The question made Beverly and Serenity exchange worried glances. It was evident that Alistair had lost important memories, including the discovery about his wife's crimes. How to explain to a confused man that his own wife had tried to sell his son? "Mr. Beaumont," Beverly began carefully, "there are things you need to know about your wife. Things you discovered before the flood." "What kind of things?" he asked, but his attention was diverted when Carter began to cry again. Instinctively, he reached out his arms, and Serenity, after hesitating for a moment, handed over the baby. The connection between father and son was immediate and touching. Alistair held Carter with a natural tenderness, mumbling words of comfort that seemed to come from a deep place in his soul, even if his conscious mind didn't fully remember why they were there. "He's hungry," Serenity observed. "I gave him sugar water, but he needs real milk." Alistair looked at the girl with deep gratitude. "You took care of him." "A child taking care of another child?" "I know how to get by," she replied with simplicity. "I learned on the street." It was at that moment that Beverly realized something that made her freeze. Outside the abandoned school, two figures moved among the shadows. They were being watched again, but this time by different people. Tall, burly men who clearly did not belong in that neighborhood. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. "Now." "Why?" asked Alistair, still confused. "Because they found us." The sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the schoolyard made Serenity act on instinct. She knew that kind of movement, calculated, threatening, from people who were not there to talk. Quickly, she gestured for Beverly and Alistair to follow her towards the back of the building, where there was a passage she had discovered during her months of exploration. "This way," she whispered, holding Alistair's hand as he carried Carter. "I know a secret exit." Beverly looked over her shoulder and saw two silhouettes approaching the main entrance of the school. They were robust men, wearing dark clothes, and one of them was talking quietly on the cell phone. She recognized the type, the same men she had seen in Genevieve's clinic, always appearing when there were problems to solve. "They work for her," Beverly muttered to Alistair. "Your wife must have found out where we are." "My wife?" Alistair repeated, the confusion evident in his eyes. Why would she send men after us? And why are we hiding? Serenity guided them through narrow corridors and empty rooms, her small feet making minimal noise on the floor covered with rubble. She had mapped every corner of that place during the lonely nights, turning the abandoned school into her own labyrinth of security. The secret passage was a hole in the back wall, hidden behind a broken cabinet that she could move by herself. We'll have to crawl, she warned, showing the opening. It's tight, but we can get through. Beverly went first, then Alistair with Carter, and finally Serenity, who repositioned the cabinet to disguise the passage. They emerged in a vacant lot full of tall grass, away from the view of the men who were looking for them. How does a 4-year-old know so much about running and hiding? Alistair asked, watching Serenity with a mixture of admiration and sadness. When you live on the street, you learn fast, or you don't survive, she replied, checking if Carter was okay after the escape. Now we need to find another place to stay. During the next few hours, as they moved through the less crowded streets of Cedar Creek, Beverly tried gently to restore Alistair's memories. She told about the fertility clinic, about the false documents she had found, about the terrible discovery he had made about Genevieve. You came home 3 weeks ago, she explained as they walked. You overheard your wife on the phone, negotiating the delivery of Carter to a couple in Chicago. When you confronted her, Genevieve confessed everything. She said she had bought the baby from a young woman in a desperate situation, and forged documents to make you believe you were the biological father. Alistair stopped walking, his face pale. Fragments of memories began to return like painful flashes. Genevieve's cold voice on the phone, the cruel words about Carter being just merchandise, the discovery that his married life had been built on lies. I remember, he said slowly. I remember her laughing when I was shocked. She said I was too naive for the real world, that there were men willing to pay a lot of money for healthy babies. Serenity, who was walking next to him, took his free hand. It doesn't matter how Carter came to you. The important thing is that you really love him. The simple wisdom of the girl touched Alistair deeply. Even being just a child, she understood something fundamental about love and family that many adults couldn't understand. They found temporary shelter in an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. The place had been damaged by the flood, but the roof still offered protection. Serenity quickly organized a comfortable space using broken benches and pieces of fabric she found scattered around the place. You have a knack for this, Beverly observed, seeing how the girl created a welcoming environment even in the most difficult circumstances. Who taught you to take care of people like that? No one taught me, Serenity replied, adjusting an improvised blanket for Carter. I just knew I needed to take care of him, as if he were my real little brother. During the night, while Alistair tried to get Carter to sleep, his memories continued to return in painful fragments. He remembered how he had discovered other documents in Genevieve's clinic, evidence that she was involved in something much bigger than he had initially imagined. Beverly, he said suddenly, you said you ran because you found something that compromised you. What exactly did you discover? The nurse hesitated, looking at Serenity, who pretended to be asleep but was clearly listening to every word. I found false medical documents with my signature. Genevieve had forged my identification on reports that declared babies as orphans when they actually had families. She was using my professional record to give medical legitimacy to the scheme. How many babies? Alistair asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. From the documents I saw, at least 15 in the last 2 years. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. 15 families destroyed, 15 babies sold as objects. Alistair held Carter tighter, thinking about how he had been so blind to the true nature of his wife. There's something else, Beverly continued reluctantly. I found a ledger with names and values. Genevieve didn't work alone. She had partners in other cities, other doctors and nurses involved. It's a big network, Alistair, much bigger than we imagine. Serenity stirred uneasily, and Alistair realized that the conversation was making the girl distressed. He approached her and began to sing softly a song that had surfaced in his mind, an old melody that seemed familiar, but that he couldn't identify where he knew it from. Little bird flew, 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 looking for its nest in the blue sky. Serenity's eyes widened in surprise. "How do you know that song?" "I don't know," Alistair admitted. "It just came into my head." "My mom used to sing that song to me," Serenity said, her small voice filled with longing. "Before she left." "Your mom left?" Beverly asked gently. "She said she needed to go away for a while, but that she would come back to get me. That was 2 years ago." Serenity paused, looking at her small hands. "I think she forgot where she left me." Alistair felt his heart clench. That brave girl had spent 2 years alone on the streets, waiting for a mother who never returned. And now she was taking care of a baby and an adult man with the same dedication that probably her mother had shown with her. "What was your mother's name?" he asked softly. "Estelle. Estelle Sanderson." Serenity shrank a little. "She worked cleaning big buildings downtown. She always came home very tired, but she still had energy to sing to me." Beverly and Alistair exchanged glances. There was something in Serenity's story that didn't fit. Mothers don't simply abandon young children promising to return, especially mothers who clearly loved their children enough to sing to them every night. "Serenity," Alistair said carefully. "Do you remember where your mother worked? Which buildings did she clean?" "She talked about a place with a lot of medical offices. She said the doctors there were very rich and important." The girl paused, trying to remember. "It had a strange name. Some kind of clinic." Beverly felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of clinic?" "I don't know, but she always came back sad from there. She said she saw things that made her heart ache, but that she needed the job to support me." Alistair and Beverly exchanged glances again, a terrible suspicion forming in their minds. If Estelle Sanderson had worked at Genevieve's fertility clinic, if she had witnessed the crimes that happened there, then her disappearance might not be as voluntary as Serenity believed. "We need to find out what happened to your mother," Alistair said, making a decision that would change everything. The following days in the abandoned church brought an improbable routine to that group of fugitives. Alistair, still struggling with the gaps in his memory, watched fascinated as Serenity cared for Carter with a naturalness that defied her young age. The girl had found creative ways to keep the baby fed and clean, using resources she discovered on the outskirts of the church. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked on the morning of the 4th day, seeing Serenity improvise a diaper with pieces of clean cloth she had found in a donation, abandoned at the entrance of the church. "Watching other mothers in the park," she replied simply. "When you have nothing to do, you end up watching people. You learn a lot that way." Beverly had become responsible for getting basic supplies, making careful incursions into the city to buy powdered milk and diapers with the little money she had. During one of these trips, she returned with disturbing news. "Genevieve is offering a reward," she announced, sitting heavily on one of the broken benches. $10,000 for information on your whereabouts. She's saying that Alistair suffered a psychotic break and kidnapped his own son." "Kidnapped?" Alistair repeated, indignant. "Carter is my son." "According to the legal documents, yes, but Genevieve is claiming that you have been in an altered mental state since the accident. She convinced some doctors to sign reports saying that you represent a danger to the child." Serenity, who was playing with Carter on the floor, looked up. "The bad woman is very clever. She's making you look like the villain of the story." The girl's astute observation made Alistair realize how Genevieve had planned everything carefully. If she couldn't recover Carter by force, she would use the legal system to make him hand over the child himself. "There's something else," Beverly continued hesitantly. "I got some information about Estelle Sanderson." Serenity immediately stopped playing and approached, her big eyes fixed on the nurse's face. "What did you find out about my mom?" She really worked at Genevieve's clinic. She was there for almost 3 years as a cleaning lady. Beverly paused, choosing her words carefully. But there are records that she was abruptly fired 2 years ago, around the same time you said she disappeared. Why was she fired? Asked Alistair. Officially for inappropriate behavior. But I talked to a former colleague of hers, and the story is different. Estelle had started asking questions about the strange activities she witnessed at the clinic. Babies arriving in the middle of the night, documents being burned, suspicious conversations she overheard accidentally. Serenity sat on the floor, hugging her knees. My mom was always curious. She said it was important to understand what was happening around us. Her colleague said that Estelle had found a locked room in the basement of the clinic. When she finally managed to get in, she saw huge files with babies' names, photographs, and information about families. She realized that something very wrong was going on. Alistair got up and began to pace nervously around the church. If Estelle discovered Genevieve's scheme 2 years ago, why wasn't my wife exposed before? Because Estelle never had a chance to tell anyone, Beverly replied sadly. The night after her discovery, men showed up at the house where she lived with Serenity. They said she was being taken for clarification about irregularities at work. And she never came back, Serenity completed, her voice small but without tears. She had cried all the possible tears in the first months of abandonment. The neighbor who took care of you that night said that the men seemed very serious and that Estelle was terrified. She told you she would be back soon, but both she and the neighbors knew that something was very wrong. Alistair felt a growing fury burning in his chest. Genevieve had not only sold babies, she had destroyed entire families, separated mothers from their children, ruined innocent lives to feed her greed. "Where is my mom now?" asked Serenity, her voice controlled but filled with hope and fear. "We don't know for sure," admitted Beverly. "But there are rumors that Genevieve has an arrangement with a private hospital here in Cedar Creek. People who cause problems for her sometimes end up being admitted there for involuntary psychiatric treatment." The revelation made Alistair freeze. He vaguely remembered Genevieve mentioning something about a private hospital, about how it was easy to make inconvenient people simply disappear from the world. "St. Jude's Hospital," he said suddenly. "It's run by Dr. Franklin Barnes, an old college friend of Genevieve's." "How do you know that?" asked Beverly. "I'm remembering conversations. She always talked about how Franklin helped her with difficult cases, patients who needed special care, away from external interference." Alistair paused, horrified by his own words. "My God, how many people has she made disappear like that?" Serenity stood up, determined. "Then let's go there. Let's find my mom." "It's not that simple," said Beverly. "The hospital is private. It has strict security. We can't just walk in and look for her." "But I can," said Alistair thoughtfully. "I have connections in this town. My company works with several suppliers that also serve the hospital. I can get access as a technical visitor." During the days that followed, they carefully planned the approach to St. Jude's Hospital. Alistair would use his business identity to get a technical visit, claiming interest in supplying furniture for a renovation. Beverly, with her medical experience, could accompany him as a consultant. "And me?" asked Serenity. "I can't stay here alone with Carter." "You're too little to go into a psychiatric hospital," said Alistair gently. "It could be dangerous." "I'm not afraid," she replied firmly. "And if my mom is there, she needs to know that I never stopped looking for her." The girl's determination was moving and terrifying at the same time. At 4 years old, she had developed a courage that many adults would envy, but also a desperate need to find the mother who might no longer be in a condition to recognize her. On the eve of the planned visit to the hospital, something unexpected happened. Alistair woke up in the middle of the night with a sudden and clear memory. He remembered seeing Estelle Sanderson before, not at Genevieve's clinic, but at his own company. "Beverly," he whispered, waking the nurse. I remember Estelle. She didn't just work at the clinic. What do you mean? About 5 years ago, my company hired a cleaning crew for the night shift. Estelle was part of that team. I saw her several times working in the offices late at night. The revelation brought a new dimension to the story. If Estelle had worked at Alistair's company, she might have had access to information about him, about his personal life, about his marriage to Genevieve. "Do you think she knew who you were when she started working at the clinic?" asked Beverly. "It's possible. And if Genevieve found out about that connection—" Alistair didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. Genevieve could have used Estelle as a source of information about her husband, or worse, she could have seen her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Serenity, who had pretended to be sleeping, sat up abruptly. "My mom always knew your name. When she came back from work at the clinic, she sometimes mentioned a man named Alistair. She said he seemed to be a good person, different from the others who worked there." The connection between the stories was becoming clearer and more frightening. Estelle had met Alistair through work, had witnessed Genevieve's crimes at the clinic, and had been silenced before she could alert anyone about what was happening. "Tomorrow we're going to find her," said Alistair with determination. "And we're going to end Genevieve's crimes once and for all." But none of them was prepared for what they would discover at St. Jude's Hospital, or for the disturbing truth that would change everything they thought they knew about their own stories. St. Jude's Hospital stood imposing in the center of Cedar Creek, its white walls and mirrored windows reflecting a prosperity that contrasted with the dark nature of its secrets. Alistair adjusted his tie nervously as he observed the 5-story building, trying to look like a confident businessman on a routine business visit. "Remember," whispered Beverly beside him, "we are suppliers interested in equipping the new inpatient wards. Keep the conversation focused on furniture and don't show specific interest in the patients." Serenity had stayed at the church with Carter, but not without vehement protests. The girl had tied a ribbon on Alistair's wrist, a ribbon that had belonged to her mother, saying that this way Estelle would know that her daughter was looking for her. "If she's there, tell her that I never stopped waiting," Serenity had asked, her big eyes shining with a painful hope. The hospital receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a professional smile, checked the falsified documents that Beverly had obtained through old contacts. "Mr. Beaumont, what a pleasure to receive you. Dr. Barnes is waiting for you in the administration." Dr. Franklin Barnes was a short, chubby man with gold-rimmed glasses and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alistair recognized him immediately from the parties that Genevieve organized, always present, always whispering private conversations with his wife. "Alistair, my dear fellow," exclaimed Franklin, extending his hand. "Genevieve told me about your situation. I hope you are feeling better." The careful choice of words confirmed Alistair's suspicions. Genevieve had set the stage, probably suggesting that he was going through psychological problems. "I'm fine, thank you. In fact, I came here on business. My company is expanding into the hospital sector." Of course. Let's take a tour of the facilities." Franklin gestured for them to follow him. "We have some interesting expansion projects." As they walked through the clinically clean corridors, Alistair discreetly observed each door, each sign, each movement of the staff. The hospital had a heavy atmosphere, as if it kept secrets in every room. "This is our psychiatry ward," explained Franklin, leading them through the 3rd floor. "We treat special cases, patients who need differentiated care." Beverly recognized the tone. She had worked long enough in the medical field to identify when a colleague was talking about questionable practices. "What kind of special cases?" she asked innocently. "People with complex disorders, who sometimes need to be isolated from society for extended periods. Often, families are unable to cope with these cases and ask us to take care of them indefinitely." Alistair felt a chill down his spine. Indefinitely probably meant that people simply disappeared into the system, losing contact with the outside world. "Can I see the rooms?" he asked, to assess what kind of furniture would be most suitable. Franklin hesitated for a moment. "Some rooms are occupied. Our patients greatly value privacy." "Of course, just the empty rooms," Alistair insisted. As Franklin opened the door of an apparently empty room, Beverly pretended to trip and leaned on the wall, taking the opportunity to peek through the glass window of an occupied room. What she saw made her freeze. A thin woman with brown hair and a lost look was sitting on a narrow bed, staring blankly at the wall. Even with her appearance altered by months of internment, Beverly recognized the face from the photographs she had found among Serenity's belongings. "It was Estelle Sanderson. Alistair," she whispered urgently as he approached. "It's her." Alistair looked through the window and saw the woman who had worked at his company years ago. Estelle seemed to have aged decades in just 2 years. Her eyes, once lively and curious according to Serenity's descriptions, were now empty and expressionless. "What happened to her?" he murmured, horrified. Franklin, who had noticed their interest, approached quickly. "That's a very sad case. The patient suffers from severe paranoid delusions. She arrived here claiming to have discovered a medical conspiracy, completely disconnected from reality." "What kind of delusions?" asked Beverly, struggling to keep her voice neutral. "Fantasies about babies being sold, false documents, that sort of thing. Cases like this are more common than you might think. People with psychiatric problems often create elaborate conspiracy theories." The cruel irony of the situation made Alistair clench his fists. Estelle was being held captive precisely because she had discovered the truth, but her truth was being used as evidence of her supposed madness. "Does she have family?" he asked. "Unfortunately, no. The documentation indicates that she was a single mother, but the child was placed in a shelter when she was admitted. Cases like this are particularly tragic." Alistair had to strive not to react. The casual way Franklin mentioned the separation of Estelle from her daughter revealed how systematic the cruelty of the scheme was. "Can we continue the tour?" suggested Beverly, realizing that Alistair was about to lose control. On the following floors, they saw more rooms occupied by patients who seemed to be in a state of permanent sedation. Young women, some with empty expressions similar to Estelle's, others simply sleeping deeply in the middle of the afternoon. "You have a lot of cases of young women," Beverly observed. "Unfortunately, women are more susceptible to certain types of postpartum disorders and severe depression," explained Franklin without showing any real emotion. "Many arrive here after episodes related to motherhood." The explanation made Alistair connect disturbing dots. These women were probably mothers whose babies had been acquired by Genevieve. After being separated from their children, they were admitted to prevent them from causing problems. "Dr. Barnes," said Alistair carefully, "my wife Genevieve mentioned that you have a long-standing partnership. She works with fertility cases, doesn't she?" "Ah, yes. Genevieve is an exemplary professional. She frequently sends us patients who need psychological follow-up after fertilization procedures. Not all women cope well with the challenges of motherhood." The sanitized version of the crimes that Franklin presented was revolting. He had transformed the kidnapping of babies and the forced internment of mothers into a respectable medical narrative. After 2 hours of tour, they finally managed to say goodbye to Franklin and leave the hospital. Alistair was visibly shaken, and Beverly needed to hold him by the arm to keep him walking normally until they reached a safe distance. "We have to get her out of there," he said as soon as they were far enough away. "Estelle is being held prisoner." "It won't be easy," Beverly replied. "The hospital has strict security, and legally she's a psychiatric patient admitted." "Then let's make it public. Let's expose what's going on." "With what evidence?" "Our word against that of respected doctors. And don't forget that you yourself are wanted as a fugitive." Alistair stopped walking, frustrated. So what do we do? Let Estelle rot there while her daughter waits for her on the street? We need concrete evidence, documents, records, something that proves the crimes. Beverly thought for a moment. I still have some contacts in the medical field. Maybe I can get access to the hospital's files. It's too risky. More risky than letting Serenity grow up without knowing what happened to her mother. When they returned to the church, they found a scene that warmed their hearts despite the dark circumstances. Serenity was singing softly to Carter, the same song that her mother used to sing to her. The baby watched her with fascination, as if he understood that that small voice was his protection against the cruel world outside. "Did you find her?" asked Serenity as soon as she saw them arrive. Alistair knelt beside the girl. "We found your mum, Serenity. She's alive." The girl's eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. "Can I see her?" "She's sick, in a hospital. But we're going to find a way to bring her back to you. Promise?" Alistair looked at that brave child who had saved his life and Carter's, who had taken care of them without asking anything in return, who deserved to have her family reunited again. "I promise," he said, knowing that he had just made a commitment that would change all his priorities. The discovery that Estelle was alive, but imprisoned in St. Jude's Hospital, brought a new urgency to the group of fugitives. In the nights that followed, while Serenity cared for Carter with her unwavering dedication, Alistair and Beverly planned ways to gather evidence against Genevieve and rescue the girl's mother. "I made contact with Mindy, a nurse who works on the night shift at the hospital," announced Beverly one cold morning. "She's willing to help us, but she needs guarantees that she won't be harmed." "What kind of guarantees?" asked Alistair. "Protection. Mindy says she already suspected some irregularities at the hospital, but she never had the courage to investigate. If she helps us get evidence, she'll need to leave town afterwards." Serenity, who was feeding Carter a bottle, looked up. "Does she know my mom?" "She does. Mindy says that Estelle was one of the first patients who made her suspicious. She arrived at the hospital shouting about stolen babies, but within a few days she was completely sedated and apathetic." "What did they do to her?" asked Alistair, feeling anger growing in his chest. "Heavy medication, according to Mindy. Estelle receives daily doses of sedatives that keep her in a vegetative state. Officially, it's treatment for her psychotic episodes, but Mindy believes it's to keep her silenced." The systematic cruelty of the scheme left Alistair nauseated. How many other women were being held in chemical captivity to protect Genevieve's crimes? "Can Mindy get access to medical records?" he asked. "Limited, but she can photograph documents during the night shift, when there's less supervision." Beverly paused. "The problem is that we need someone to distract her while she accesses the files." "I'll go," said Alistair immediately. "You can't. Genevieve certainly alerted Franklin about your visit. They'll be watching." "Then I'll go," declared Serenity, standing up with determination. "Absolutely not," protested Alistair and Beverly in unison. "You don't understand," insisted the girl. "No one suspects a child. I can walk into the hospital saying I'm lost, that I'm looking for my mum. While everyone is trying to help me, the nurse can get the documents." Serenity's logic was disturbingly solid, but the idea of putting a 4-year-old in danger was unacceptable to Alistair. "It's too risky," he said firmly. "More risky than letting my mom rot in that place," replied Serenity, a fierce determination shining in her small eyes. During the following days, while they debated alternatives, the situation became even more complicated. Beverly returned from one of her outings to get supplies with alarming news. "Genevieve increased the reward to $50,000, she announced, dropping heavily on one of the broken benches. "And worse, she's using the local media. There are posters with photos of you scattered around the city." Alistair took the newspaper that Beverly had brought. On the front page, his photo appeared next to a sensationalist headline, "Businessman in breakdown kidnaps own son." The article, clearly planted by Genevieve, portrayed him as an unstable man who had kidnapped Carter during a psychotic episode. "She's destroying my reputation," he murmured, reading the allegations that he had threatened his wife and fled with the baby for no apparent reason. "It's worse than that," said Beverly. "The article mentions that you may be accompanied by dangerous accomplices. My description is also in the newspaper." Serenity picked up the newspaper and tried to read the words, recognizing some letters she had learned watching signs on the street. "What does it say about you?" "That I'm a nurse, fired for inappropriate behavior, possibly involved in the kidnapping." The web of lies that Genevieve had woven was impressive in its completeness. She had turned the victims into villains and the crimes into heroism. "We need to act soon," said Alistair. "Every day that passes, she consolidates this false narrative more." It was that night that everything changed. Mindy, the nurse from St. Jude's Hospital, appeared unexpectedly at the church, clearly terrified. "They found out I'm helping you," she said without preamble. "Dr. Barnes called me in today for a conversation. He asked specific questions about who had inquired about Estelle Sanderson." "How did they find out?" asked Beverly. "Someone must have seen our conversation yesterday, or there are more people involved in the scheme than we imagined." Mindy looked at Serenity, who was holding Carter protectively. "I brought something you need to see." She took a crumpled envelope from her pocket. Inside, there were photographs of medical documents and a list of names. "I got this before they took me off duty. They're the records of all the women admitted to the hospital in the last 3 years, with the official reasons and the true reasons for the admissions." Alistair examined the documents under the faint light of the church. The list was shocking. 15 women, all young, all admitted after psychotic episodes related to motherhood. But Mindy's personal notes revealed the truth. All had been separated from their babies a few days before admission. "My God," he whispered, 15 families destroyed. "There's more," said Mindy, showing another document. "This is the financial record of the admissions. All are paid by a shell company registered in Genevieve's name." Beverly studied the papers. "This proves that she's financing the admissions to keep the mothers silenced." "And is there something about my mom?" asked Serenity, trying to get closer to the documents. Mindy picked up a specific sheet. "Estelle Sanderson, admitted exactly 2 years ago, the day after the disappearance of her 2-year-old daughter. Official reason, post-traumatic psychosis with paranoid delusions." "And the real reason?" asked Alistair, although he already knew the answer. "Discovered irregularities at the fertility clinic where she worked. Threatened to expose illegal baby-selling scheme." Serenity listened to everything in silence, processing information that was too complex for her age, but that finally explained why her mother had disappeared. "Can I see her now?" she asked in a small voice. "Not in the current conditions," replied Mindy gently. "Estelle is being kept in heavy sedation. She can hardly recognize where she is. But can she be cured? If we stop the medication and give her body time to clear, yes, she can recover completely." It was at that moment that Mindy gave them the most disturbing information of all. "There's something else you need to know about Carter," she said, hesitant. "What?" asked Alistair, instinctively holding the baby closer to his chest. "I got access to his file too. Carter wasn't bought from an unknown mother, as Genevieve said. He was taken from a specific mother who is admitted to the hospital." The silence that followed was deafening. Alistair looked at the baby in his arms, then at Serenity, then back at Mindy. "Which mother?" asked Beverly, although a terrible suspicion was already forming in her mind. Mindy looked directly at Serenity. "Estelle Sanderson, Carter is your mother's biological son. He is your brother." The revelation hit the group like lightning. Serenity, who had cared for Carter with so much love and dedication, had been protecting her own brother without knowing it. Alistair, who had struggled to save the baby he believed to be his son, was discovering that he was actually protecting Serenity's family. "That means," began Serenity slowly, It means that Genevieve didn't just destroy your family once, said Alistair, his voice hoarse with emotion. She separated you from your mother and your newborn brother, and then tricked me into believing that Carter was my son. The elaborate cruelty of Genevieve's plan was revealed in all its horrible extent. She had used Alistair's paternal love to protect a stolen child, while keeping the real mother sedated and the sister abandoned on the streets. But why did she do this? Asked Serenity, trying to understand the evil that had ruined her life. Mindy looked at the documents again. According to the records I found, Genevieve discovered that Estelle had worked at Alistair's company. She knew that if Estelle told the truth about the clinic, Alistair would believe her because of the previous connection. So she decided to use that to her advantage. How? She separated you and Carter from Estelle, had your mother admitted to keep her silenced, and then presented Carter to Alistair as his own son. If anyone questioned the origin of the baby, she could always claim it was a legal adoption. The manipulation was so complex and cruel that it left everyone momentarily speechless. Genevieve had orchestrated a plan that destroyed an entire family, while creating the illusion of forming another. Now I understand why she wanted to sell Carter, said Alistair bitterly. When she realized that I might find out the truth, she decided to get rid of the evidence. That night, as Serenity cradled her newfound brother, she made a silent promise. No matter what happened, she would reunite her family again, and Genevieve would pay for every tear, every day of separation, every moment of suffering she had caused. The revelation that Carter was Serenity's brother completely transformed the dynamics of the group. The girl, who already cared for the baby with maternal love, now did so with a protective intensity that touched Alistair deeply. Watching her sing the songs that Estelle had taught her little brother, seeing how she instinctively knew how to comfort him, was both beautiful and devastating. She always knew, murmured Beverly one morning, seeing Serenity talking quietly to Carter. Deep down, she always felt he was family. Alistair nodded, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. For weeks, he had considered himself Carter's father, had developed a genuine love for the child. Discovering that this love had been built on a lie was painful, but seeing the real connection between the siblings made him question his own feelings. "Does this change anything for you?" asked Beverly gently. "About Carter?" "No," Alistair replied without hesitation. "He's still my son, regardless of genetics, and Serenity, she's my responsibility now, too." Mindy had returned home after handing over the documents, but had promised to keep in touch. The following morning, she brought news that further complicated the situation. "Genevieve found out you were at the hospital," she announced, clearly nervous. "Doctor, Barnes was ordered to increase security and transfer some patients to a more isolated unit." "Including Estelle?" asked Serenity immediately. "Including Estelle. They're moving her later today to a private clinic in Syracuse, a place where it will be much harder to get to her." The news was like a punch in the stomach. After finally discovering where Estelle was, they would lose her again. "We can't let that happen," said Alistair firmly. "This family has been separated for too long." "What do you suggest?" asked Beverly. "Invade a psychiatric hospital?" "If necessary." "Alistair, that's crazy. You'd be arrested, Carter would be handed back to Genevieve, and Serenity would go back to the streets." The cruel reality of the situation weighed on all of them. Any rash action could destroy the few chances they had of keeping the family together. It was then that Serenity, who had been quietly listening to the adults' discussion, made a proposal that surprised everyone. "What if we didn't try to get her out of there?" she said slowly. "What if we made her leave on her own?" "What do you mean?" asked Alistair. "The drugs make her weak and confused, right? But if she stopped taking the drugs, she would get better." Mindy nodded. "Yes, but the medications are administered by the medical staff. She has no choice. What if she knew that I'm alive? If she knew she needed to get strong to take care of me and Carter. Serenity's eyes shone with determination. My mom was always strong. She just needs to remember why she should fight. The idea was simple, but risky. If they could get a message to Estelle, if she knew that her children were alive and needed her, perhaps she would find the strength to resist the medication, to pretend she was still sedated while planning an escape. "How would we get a message to her?" asked Beverly. Mindy thought for a moment. "I still have limited access to the hospital. I can try to leave something in her room before the transfer." "What kind of thing?" Serenity ran to the corner of the church where she kept her few belongings. She returned, holding a crumpled drawing, one of the birds she had made when she still lived on the streets, but this time colored with crayons that Alistair had gotten for her. "My mom will recognize my drawings," she said, "and if I write a message—" "You know how to write?" asked Alistair, surprised. "Some words. I learned by looking at the signs on the street." Serenity took a pencil and with shaky but legible handwriting wrote on the back of the drawing, "Mom, me and Carter are okay. Come back to us, Serenity." The simplicity of the message was perfect. Even in a state altered by medication, Estelle would recognize her daughter's drawing and understand that her children were alive. "I'll try to deliver this today," promised Mindy, carefully storing the drawing. "But you need to be prepared for nothing to happen. Estelle may be too medicated to understand." In the hours that followed, the tension in the church was palpable. Alistair paced nervously through the dilapidated corridors. Beverly obsessively checked if they had all the necessary supplies, and Serenity sang softly to Carter, as if the music could somehow reach her distant mother. In the late afternoon, Mindy returned with a tense face, but eyes shining with hope. "I managed to deliver the message," she announced, "but there was something unexpected." "What?" everyone asked at the same time. "When I put the drawing on the table next to Estelle's bed, she was sleeping, but when I turned to leave, I heard her whisper Serenity's name." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Even sedated, even after 2 years of captivity, Estelle's maternal instinct still responded to her daughter's name. "More importantly," continued Mindy, "I managed to find out details about the transfer. Estelle will be moved tomorrow morning in an ambulance to the clinic in Syracuse. There is only one driver and one nurse accompanying her." "Why are you telling me this?" asked Alistair, although he already suspected the answer. "Because the route passes through an isolated road on the outskirts of the city, a place where an ambulance could have mechanical problems." The suggestion was clear, but the implications were frightening. They would be contemplating intercepting a medical vehicle, which technically would be kidnapping. "It's too risky," said Beverly. "If something goes wrong—" "If we don't do anything, we lose Estelle forever," replied Alistair. "And Genevieve gains time to erase all the evidence." Serenity, who had heard the whole conversation, approached the adults with Carter in her arms. "My mom always said that when you really love someone, you do anything to protect that person," she said with seriousness beyond her years. "Do you love us?" The simple and direct question of the girl touched Alistair in the depths of his soul. In those weeks taking care of her and Carter, he had discovered a type of love that he didn't know existed. Not only paternal love, but love for a chosen family, for people who had become important through extraordinary circumstances. "I love you more than my own life," he answered honestly. "Then let's go get my mum," said Serenity with simple determination. That night, they carefully planned the operation. Mindy provided details about the route, the times, and the appearance of the ambulance. Alistair would use his car to force the ambulance to stop, claiming an emergency. Beverly, with her medical experience, would assess Estelle's condition and determine if she was in a condition to be moved. "And I stay with Carter?" asked Serenity. "You stay in a safe place with Carter," confirmed Alistair. "If something goes wrong, if we don't come back, Mindy knows people who can take care of you." "Nothing will go wrong," said Serenity with the unwavering confidence of childhood. "Mom is waiting for us. She knows we're coming." The next morning, when the sun began to rise over Cedar Creek, Alistair looked at the two children who had become the center of his life. Serenity held Carter, singing softly the song that her mother had taught, the same song that he himself knew for reasons that he still didn't completely understand. In a few hours, they would attempt something that could reunite a family or destroy everything they had built together. But for the first time in his life, Alistair knew exactly why he was fighting. "We're going to bring your mother home," he promised Serenity, sealing a commitment that would test all the limits of his courage and determination. The road that connected Cedar Creek to Syracuse snaked through fields of corn and pastures, offering long, isolated stretches where a vehicle could stop without attracting attention. Alistair had positioned his car on a strategic curve, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel as he waited for the ambulance transporting Estelle. Beverly was hidden in the nearby vegetation, ready to act as soon as the ambulance stopped. They had rehearsed the plan several times. Alistair would feign a mechanical problem or a medical emergency. Beverly would introduce herself as a nurse and offer help, and during the confusion, they would try to assess Estelle's condition. "There she comes," murmured Alistair as he spotted the white ambulance approaching on the empty road. His heart beat so hard that he was sure the occupants of the medical vehicle could hear it. The ambulance slowed down when it saw the car stopped on the road. Alistair got out quickly, making desperate gestures to attract attention. The driver, a middle-aged man in a hospital uniform, stopped the vehicle and opened the window. "Car trouble?" he asked, clearly wanting to resolve the situation quickly. "My wife," said Alistair, pointing to the car. "She's feeling sick. I think it might be her heart. Could you help?" The nurse accompanying the transfer got out of the ambulance, a look of resignation on his face. It was evident that he didn't want to be late, but he couldn't ignore a medical emergency. "Where is she?" asked the nurse. It was at that moment that Beverly emerged from the vegetation, quickly adjusting a white coat she had managed to borrow. "I'm a nurse," she announced, approaching the group. "I was passing by when I saw the ambulance. Can I help?" The nurse looked at her suspiciously for a moment, but the presence of a colleague seemed to reassure him. "We have an important transfer. We can't be too late." "Of course, I understand perfectly. Let me just take a quick look at your patient." While Beverly pretended to examine Alistair, who convincingly portrayed the symptoms of a heart attack, she whispered, "I need to see Estelle." "Distract them for a few more minutes." Alistair intensified his acting, groaning and holding his chest. "The pain is getting worse," he declared. "I think I need oxygen." The ambulance nurse hesitated. "We have equipment here, but our patient—" "It won't take long," said Beverly firmly, using all the authority that her medical experience gave her. "A cardiac emergency can be fatal if not treated immediately." While the two men were busy preparing the oxygen equipment, Beverly discreetly approached the rear of the ambulance. Through the small window, she could see Estelle lying on the stretcher, apparently unconscious. But when Beverly tapped lightly on the glass, Estelle's eyes opened slowly. They were only a few seconds of eye contact, but Beverly saw something that filled her with hope, recognition. Estelle was not completely lost in the medication. "How is our patient?" asked Beverly loudly, addressing the driver. "Stable," he replied automatically. "Routine transfer for specialized treatment." "What kind of treatment?" insisted Beverly, trying to buy more time. "Psychiatric problems. The patient had delusions about lost children, that sort of thing." The driver's words were said casually, but Beverly saw Estelle react subtly. Her eyes moved towards the voice, and she seemed to try to focus on the words. "How sad," commented Beverly. "It must be devastating for a mother to lose contact with her children." This time, Estelle's reaction was more evident. She tried to move on the stretcher, and her lips seemed to form a silent word. Beverly leaned closer to the window and managed to read Estelle's lips. Serenity. Beverly's heart raced. The drawing had worked. Estelle was remembering her daughter, fighting against the effects of the medication. "I think our emergency is under control," announced Alistair, approaching the group. He had realized that they needed to end the staging before anyone became suspicious. "Are you sure?" asked the nurse. "It can be dangerous to drive after a cardiac episode." "I'm feeling much better. Thank you for the help." As the medical professionals stored the equipment and prepared to leave, Beverly managed a few more seconds near the ambulance. She held a piece of paper against the window where she had written quickly, "Serenity and Carter are safe. Resist." Estelle's eyes fixed on the message, and for the first time in 2 years, a tear rolled down her face. She nodded almost imperceptibly, indicating that she had understood. The ambulance left, taking Estelle further away from her children, but also taking a woman who now knew she had reasons to fight. Alistair and Beverly returned to the church in silence, each processing what had happened. "She's alive in there," said Beverly finally. "The medication hasn't completely erased her essence. When she knew that her children were safe, I saw a strength returning to her eyes." Serenity was waiting for them anxiously, Carter sleeping in her arms. "Did you see her? How is my mom?" "She's fighting, my dear," replied Alistair, kneeling beside the girl. "And now she knows that you are okay. That will give her strength to recover." "When is she coming home?" Serenity's innocent question touched on the central problem they faced. Even if Estelle managed to break free from the effects of the medication, she was still legally interned in a psychiatric institution. Genevieve had created a perfect prison. Any attempt by Estelle to tell the truth would be seen as evidence of her alleged delusions. "We need a different strategy," said Beverly. "We can't just get Estelle out of the clinic. We need to dismantle Genevieve's entire scheme." "How?" "With the evidence that Mindy got. If we can expose the crimes, Estelle will be released automatically." Alistair thought about the implications. "But for that, we would need to involve authorities. And with all of Genevieve's smear campaign, who will believe us?" It was then that Mindy appeared at the church, once again without warning, but this time with an expression of extreme urgency. "You need to get out of here now," she said without preamble. "Genevieve found out about our attempt to contact Estelle." "How?" asked Beverly. "The ambulance nurse reported the incident on the road. He described you two perfectly. Genevieve connected the dots and understood that you are trying to get to Estelle. It means that she will intensify efforts to find you. And worse, she may decide that Estelle represents too great a risk to be kept alive." Alistair's blood ran cold. "You're saying that Genevieve might—" "I'm saying that psychiatric patients sometimes suffer complications in their treatments, especially when they become too inconvenient." Serenity, who had heard the whole conversation, held Carter tighter. "Is she going to hurt my mum?" Mindy hesitated before answering. "Genevieve eliminates problems. It's always been that way. If she considers Estelle a threat, then we need to act faster," said Alistair with determination. "We're not going to run and leave Estelle at the mercy of this woman. What do you propose? Let's go directly to the root of the problem. Let's confront Genevieve." "Alistair, that's suicide," protested Beverly. "She has men working for her. She has influence. She has money." "And we have the truth," he replied. "And we have something she never expected. A family willing to fight for each other." That night, as they planned a strategy that could save Estelle or destroy them all, Serenity made an observation that changed the perspective of the entire group. "The bad woman thinks she's very smart," she said, looking at the drawing she had made for her mother. "But she doesn't know one important thing." "What?" asked Alistair. "She doesn't know how strong my mom is when she has something to protect, and now she knows she needs to come home." The girl's unwavering confidence in her mother's strength gave Alistair an idea. Maybe they didn't need to save Estelle. Maybe she herself would find a way to get out of the clinic. And when that happened, they needed to be ready to protect her and to face together the woman who had destroyed so many lives. "Tomorrow we're going home," said Alistair, making a decision that would change everything. "We're going to stop running and start fighting." The decision to return to Cedar Creek and face Genevieve directly brought a palpable change to the atmosphere of the church. For the first time in weeks, Alistair was not running. He was moving towards the conflict. Serenity noticed the difference in his posture, in the way his hands no longer trembled when he held Carter, in the determination that had replaced the fear in his eyes. "We can't go unprepared," said Beverly, spreading the documents that Mindy had obtained over a makeshift table. "Genevieve is dangerous because she's intelligent. She always has a contingency plan." Alistair studied the papers once again, looking for something they had missed before. "There are 15 women on this list. 15 families destroyed. If we can find some of these families, if we can prove that they were also victims, it would be their word against that of respected doctors," interrupted Mindy. "Genevieve has already prepared a narrative for each case. All these women are officially psychiatric patients with delusions." "But I'm not," said Alistair firmly. "I'm a respected businessman in town. If I tell my version of the facts—" "You're a fugitive wanted for kidnapping," reminded Beverly gently. "Genevieve destroyed your credibility before you even knew you were at war." The frustration was palpable. Every time they found a possible solution, they discovered that Genevieve had anticipated and blocked that escape route. It was Serenity who broke the silence that followed. "You're thinking like adults," she said, looking up from the drawing she was making to entertain Carter. "But children are simpler. If someone hurts you, you tell everyone until someone believes you." "Serenity, we've already tried that," said Alistair patiently. "The adults aren't believing us." "They haven't tried telling the children," she replied with relentless logic. "The other children who were separated from their mothers, they know the truth. And children don't lie about these things." The girl's observation planted a seed of an idea in Alistair's mind. "You're suggesting that we find the other children who were sold?" "I'm suggesting that we stop trying to convince adults who have already decided who to believe. The children remember their real mothers. They know when something is wrong." Beverly leaned forward, interested. "But how would we find these children?" "They were sold to families in other cities, other states." Mindy, who had remained quiet, suddenly perked up. "Wait, maybe we don't need to look too far. I remember some cases where the children stayed right here in Cedar Creek. Genevieve sometimes sold to local couples when the price was especially high." "What kind of couples?" asked Alistair. "Rich people who wanted to avoid the delays of legal adoption. Businessmen, doctors, politicians. People that Genevieve knew wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about the origin of the children." The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed by Alistair. He himself had been one of those people, accepting Carter without questioning his origin too deeply. "Do you have names?" he asked. Mindy hesitated. "Some. But they are powerful people, Alistair. If we start making accusations, they can destroy us," he completed. "But they can also be our allies if they discover that they were deceived as I was." During the rest of the day, they developed a plan that was risky, but had a solid logic. Instead of trying to expose Genevieve publicly, they would discreetly approach the families who had adopted children through her. If they could convince even 1 or 2 families that they had been deceived, they would have powerful allies in the fight against Genevieve. "Oh, we'll start with the Cartersons," decided Mindy. Dr. Richard Carterson and his wife adopted a 2-year-old girl about 8 months ago. They are decent people, and Dr. Carterson has enough influence to protect you if he decides to help." "And if they don't believe us?" asked Beverly. "Then we'll have alerted our enemies and lost our only advantage," admitted Alistair. "But it's a risk we have to take." That night, they prepared to leave the church that had been their refuge for so many weeks. Serenity walked through the dilapidated corridors one last time, as if she were saying goodbye to an old friend. "Are you going to miss this place?" asked Alistair, watching the girl. "A little," she admitted. "It was here that we became a family, but real families don't need to hide." The simple wisdom of Mindy's observation resonated deeply with Alistair. She was right. They had become a family in the most improbable of circumstances, but a true family deserved to live in the light, not in the shadows. The next morning, Mindy guided them through the streets of Cedar Creek to an upscale residential neighborhood where the Cartersons lived. The house was large and well-maintained, with a blooming garden that suggested a loving home. "How are we going to approach this?" asked Beverly as they watched the house from afar. "With the truth," replied Alistair. "We're going to knock on the door and tell our story. If they are the people Mindy says they are, they'll at least hear us out. And if they aren't, then we'll quickly find out if we're walking into a trap." Serenity held Carter tightly, her eyes fixed on the house where a child who had possibly gone through the same traumatic experience as her lived. "Do you think the little girl who lives there remembers her real mom?" "Children always remember the people who loved them," Alistair said with certainty, "even when they try to make them forget." They approached the front door, and Alistair took a deep breath before ringing the bell. The sound echoed through the house, and in a few minutes a middle-aged woman opened the door. Her eyes immediately fixed on Carter, and an expression of confusion crossed her face. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, but there was a tension in her voice. "Mrs. Carterson, my name is Alistair Beaumont. We need to talk to you and your husband about a very important matter related to your daughter's adoption." The color drained from the woman's face. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Please," Beverly said gently. "We know this is disturbing, but there are things you need to know about your daughter's origin." At that moment, a little girl appeared behind Dr. Carterson, hiding behind her adoptive mother's legs. She was about 3 years old, with dark hair and large, curious eyes. When she saw Serenity, she stopped hiding and watched her with interest. "Hi," Serenity said softly. "What's your name?" "Clara," the girl replied shyly. "Clara is a pretty name." "I'm Serenity." The simple interaction between the two children had an unexpected effect on Dr. Carterson. Her expression of suspicion softened slightly as she saw how Clara reacted positively to Serenity. "Perhaps we should talk," she said reluctantly. "My husband is home. Come in, please." Dr. Richard Carterson was a tall, serious man with graying hair and an imposing presence. When his wife explained who the visitors were, his expression hardened. "If you're here to try to take Clara away from us," he began. "We're not," Alistair interrupted quickly. "We're here because you were also victims of Genevieve Beaumont, just like us." Genevieve's name made the two adults exchange meaningful glances. Clearly, there was something about the adoption experience that bothered them. "She was your wife?" Dr. Carterson asked. "She was, and I found out that she was selling babies stolen from their real mothers." Dr. Carterson sat heavily in an armchair. "We always knew there was something strange about the process. Very fast, very little paperwork, very high price. But we wanted a daughter so badly." "And what state was Clara in when she arrived?" Beverly asked gently. "Terrified," admitted Dr. Carterson. "She cried constantly, especially at night. She seemed to be looking for someone. It took months for her to calm down." While the adults talked, Serenity had sat on the floor with Clara, showing her a drawing she had made of colorful birds. The girl studied the drawing with fascination. "My mom used to make drawings like that," Clara said suddenly, her small voice filled with longing. The silence that followed was deafening. The adults stopped talking and looked at the girl, who continued to study Serenity's drawing. "Which mom, sweetheart?" Dr. Carterson asked gently. "The mom who sang to me," Clara replied simply, "before I came to live here." Tears began to roll down Dr. Carterson's face. "Richard," she whispered, "what have we done?" Clara's revelation about her other mom completely transformed the atmosphere in the Cartersons' house. Dr. Carterson held his wife's hand as he processed the terrible possibility that their adopted daughter had been stolen from her biological family. "Clara, dear, Doctor," Carterson said in a trembling voice. "Can you tell me more about the mum who sang to you?" The girl looked at Serenity as if seeking permission or encouragement. Serenity nodded gently. "She had hair like mine," Clara said, touching her own dark curls. "And she always smelled like flowers. She called me her shining star." "Do you remember what the house where you lived with her was like?" Alistair asked carefully. "It was small. It had a big window where she showed me the birds in the yard, and there was a song she sang when I had nightmares." Clara began to hum a low melody, and Serenity immediately recognized it as a variation of the same song that her own mother used to sing. It was as if all the mothers who were victims of Genevieve shared the same musical memories with their daughters. Dr. Carterson stood up abruptly and walked to the window, wiping his eyes. "My God, Lucia, what have we done?" "We participated in a kidnapping. You didn't know," Beverly said firmly. "Genevieve is an expert at deceiving good people. She counts on the desperation of couples who want to start a family." "That doesn't absolve us," Dr. Carterson replied, turning to the group. "Clara has a biological mother somewhere, probably suffering from the loss of her daughter." Mindy, who had remained quiet until then, spoke up. "Actually, I know what happened to Clara's mother. She's in the same hospital where Estelle was." The information struck the Cartersons like lightning. Dr. Lucia covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. "Hospitalized for what?" she asked. "Officially for delusions about a kidnapped daughter, in reality to keep her silenced about the crimes she witnessed." Dr. Carterson sat down again, looking as if he had aged years in a few minutes. "How can we fix this? How do we return Clara to her real mother?" The question touched on the heart of the dilemma they faced. Clara had lived with the Cartersons for 8 months, long enough to create emotional bonds. Separating her from them would be traumatic, but keeping her away from her biological mother was also cruel. It was Clara who offered a perspective that none of the adults had considered. "Can I have 2 families?" she asked innocently. "Like Serenity has Uncle Alistair and Aunt Beverly, but also has a mum." The simplicity of the question illuminated a possibility that everyone had ignored. Maybe the solution wasn't choosing between families, but expanding the concept of family. "It would be possible," Alistair said slowly, "if we can get Clara's mother out of the hospital and prove that she's not crazy, just a victim of a crime. But for that we would need to expose Genevieve's entire scheme," Beverly observed. "Doctor," Carterson straightened up, a new determination shining in his eyes. "Then that's what we're going to do. I have influence in this town, resources, contacts. If Genevieve is keeping innocent mothers locked up to hide her crimes, we're going to stop it." "It's dangerous," Mindy warned. "Genevieve has power, money, and people working for her who don't hesitate to use violence. She also has something she didn't expect, adversaries who refuse to remain silent," Dr. Carterson retorted. "How many other families like ours are there? How many other couples were deceived into participating in this scheme?" During the following hours, they elaborated a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. Dr. Carterson would use his medical influence to gain access to St. Jude's hospital records, while Alistair would contact other business people in town who may have adopted children through Genevieve. "We need a meeting," Dr. Carterson decided, "all the affected families together. When Genevieve realizes that she's not facing isolated individuals, but an organized group, her position will become unsustainable." "And if she tries to intimidate the families?" Beverly asked. "Then she'll find out that it's more difficult to intimidate a group than individuals," Alistair replied, "especially when the group includes doctors, business people, and other respected people in the community." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. While Dr. Carterson made calls to contact other suspected families, and Beverly helped Dr. Lucia prepare documents about Clara's adoption, Serenity and Clara played together in the garden with Carter. It was Clara who noticed first. A black car was parked on the street, with 2 men watching the house through binoculars. "Serenity," she whispered. "Those men are looking at us." Serenity followed Clara's gaze and immediately recognized the type of surveillance she had learned to fear during her years on the streets. Quickly, she picked up Carter and ran into the house. "They found us!" she announced, bursting into the room where the adults were talking. Alistair looked out the window and saw the suspicious car. "We need to get out of here now." "Wait," Dr. Carterson said firmly. "We're not running anymore. This is my house, and I have the right to receive whoever I want." He walked determinedly to the front door and opened it, addressing directly the car on the street. The men, surprised by the direct approach, tried to pretend that they weren't watching the house. "Can I help you with something?" Dr. Carterson asked loudly so that the neighbors could hear. The driver rolled down the window. "We're lost, Doctor. Looking for an address." "What address, Doctor?" Carterson insisted, approaching closer to the car. "There's no need to bother you, sir," the man said, clearly uncomfortable with the public attention they were attracting. "I insist. I've lived here for 15 years. I know every street in the neighborhood." Other neighbors had come out of their houses, curious about the commotion. The men in the car realized that their discreet surveillance had become too public. "Thank you for the help, Doctor," the driver said quickly, "but we just found the place we were looking for." The car sped away, leaving Dr. Carterson on the sidewalk with a group of curious neighbors. He waved calmly and returned home, where he found the others watching from the window. "It worked," he said with satisfaction. "They can't maintain effective surveillance when there are too many witnesses around." "But they'll be back," Beverly observed. "Probably with a different plan." "Then we need to act faster than we planned," Alistair replied. "How many contacts were you able to make?" Dr. Carterson consulted his notes. 3 families have confirmed that they adopted through Genevieve in the last 2 years. All reported suspicious circumstances similar to ours, and there's more. One of the biological mothers managed to escape from the hospital last week. "Escape?" Mindy asked, surprised. "Julia Santos, mother of a boy who was sold to the Oliveras. She simply disappeared from the hospital one morning, and since then she's been hiding, afraid of being recaptured." Alistair felt a wave of hope. "If we can find Julia, we'll have a witness who can confirm our version of the facts." "I'm already trying to locate her through discreet contacts," Dr. Carterson said, "but there's something more important. The meeting of the affected families is scheduled for tomorrow night in a safe location." "How many families?" 6 so far, and potentially more as the news spreads. That night, as they prepared for the final confrontation with Genevieve, Serenity asked a question that touched everyone present. "When all this is over, will I still be able to stay with you?" The question revealed the deep fear she carried, that the resolution of the case would mean yet another separation, yet another loss in her young life. Alistair knelt beside her. "Serenity, you're part of our family now. No matter what happens, we won't separate again." "Promise?" "I promise. And I also promise that your mom will meet the family you've gained while she was away." "Doctor." Carterson watched the interaction with emotion. "You know," he said, "Clara also asked a similar question today. She wants to know if she can keep both of her families, us and her biological mother." "And can she?" Serenity asked. "She can," Dr. Lucia replied, hugging Clara. "Family isn't about genetics, it's about love and commitment. And we've all learned that there's enough love for everyone." That night, 2 families who had been destroyed by Genevieve's crimes began the process of rebuilding themselves, not as they were before, but as something new and stronger. And Genevieve Beaumont was about to discover that she had gravely underestimated the power of families united by the determination to protect their children. The meeting of the families affected by Genevieve's scheme took place in the community hall of a church in downtown Cedar Creek. Dr. Carterson had chosen the location strategically. It was public enough to discourage intimidation, but discreet enough to allow frank conversations. When Alistair arrived with Serenity, Carter, and Beverly, he found a scene that surpassed his most optimistic expectations. 6 families were present, each bringing children who had been adopted through Genevieve. More importantly, 3 women who had clearly experienced severe trauma were sitting together in a corner, supporting each other. "These are some of the biological mothers we were able to locate," Dr. Carterson explained in a low voice. "Julia Santos managed to escape from the hospital and brought 2 others who also fled in similar circumstances." Julia Santos was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with eyes that reflected a deep pain, but also a fierce determination. When she saw Serenity, she approached slowly. "You're the girl who's looking for her mother," she said softly. "Mindy told me about you." "Do you know my mum?" Serenity asked immediately. "I met Estelle in the hospital. She talked about you constantly, even when the medications made her confused. She never forgot her daughter." Tears shone in Serenity's eyes. "Is she okay? Can she remember me?" "She remembers everything," Julia assured. "And she's stronger than the doctors imagine. Estelle is planning something, waiting for the right moment." Alistair approached the two. "Right moment for what?" "To get out of there and come after you," Julia replied. "Your mom is a fighter, Serenity. She always has been, and now that she knows you're alive and safe, she's found reasons to resist the medications." The meeting began formally when Dr. Carterson asked for everyone's attention. The hall was filled with a mixed energy of pain, anger, and hope. Families who had been manipulated into participating in crimes, mothers who had been separated from their children, children who carried fragmented memories of other lives. "We are here, Doctor," Carterson began, "because we have all been victims of the same woman. Genevieve Beaumont has built an empire based on the destruction of families and the exploitation of human vulnerability." One of the adoptive mothers, Mrs. Helen Ferrer, stood up. "My husband and I adopted Peter a year ago. We always suspected that there was something strange about the process, but we wanted a child so badly. Now we've discovered that Peter was stolen from his mother when he was only 6 months old." "And where is Peter's biological mother?" Beverly asked. "She was also in St. Jude's Hospital," Julia replied. "But she was transferred to an even more isolated clinic when she began to show signs of recovery." The story repeated itself in a frighteningly consistent manner. Genevieve identified mothers in vulnerable situations, stole their babies, hospitalized the mothers to keep them silenced, and sold the children to couples desperate to start a family. "What she didn't expect," Alistair said, "was for the children to grow up and remember their real mothers, and for the adoptive parents to develop enough moral conscience to question what had happened." It was then that something extraordinary happened. The children, who had been brought to the meeting by their adoptive parents, began to recognize each other. Clara, the Cartersons' daughter, pointed to a boy of about 4 years old. "I remember him," she said in a low voice. "We used to play together before we came here." The boy, Peter, looked at Clara with sudden recognition. "Clara, you disappeared from the auntie's house." The aunties, to whom Peter referred, were clearly the people who worked for Genevieve, keeping the children in some kind of temporary orphanage before the adoptions. "How many children do you remember seeing there?" Alistair asked, kneeling to the children's level. "Many," Clara replied. "New children were always arriving crying, and then they would leave with different people." The children's innocent description painted a terrible picture of an industrial baby trafficking operation. Genevieve wasn't just selling children occasionally. She had set up a complete and efficient system. Mindy, who had remained at the entrance of the hall watching for possible threats, suddenly waved urgently to the group. "Someone is coming," she said in a low voice. Everyone tensed, expecting the arrival of Genevieve's men, or perhaps the woman herself. But who entered the hall was a figure that no one expected, a thin woman with disheveled hair, wearing hospital clothes and leaning on the wall to stay on her feet. It was Estelle Sanderson. "Mom!" Serenity cried, running towards the woman she had spent 2 years looking for. Estelle fell to her knees and embraced her daughter with a strength that seemed to come from a very deep place in her soul. Tears streamed down her face as she touched Serenity's hair, as if needing to confirm that the girl was real. "My star," she whispered, using the affectionate nickname that Serenity vaguely remembered from her childhood. "My brave girl." "How did you get out of the hospital?" Alistair asked, approaching carefully with Carter in his arms. Estelle looked at the baby and her eyes filled with tears again. "Carter," she said, holding out her arms. "My son." "I took care of him for you, Mom," Serenity said proudly. "I took care of both of them, him and Uncle Alistair." Estelle picked up Carter and held him together with Serenity, finally reunited with her two children. "I pretended the medications were still working," she explained to the group. "When I knew you were safe, I found the strength to resist. I memorized the guard's routine, waited for the right moment, and just walked out." "They'll be looking for you," Beverly warned. "Let them look," Estelle replied with a determination that was very reminiscent of her daughter. "I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm not going to let this woman destroy families anymore." Julia approached Estelle. "Tell them about what we saw at the clinic." Estelle took a deep breath, clearly gathering strength to recall traumatic experiences. "Genevieve doesn't work alone. There's an entire network of people involved. Doctors who falsify birth certificates, nurses who administer medications to keep the mothers silenced, lawyers who create false adoption documents." "How many people are involved?" Dr. Carterson asked. "At least 20 that I was able to identify. And it's not just here in Cedar Creek. They have operations in other cities, other states. I've been in contact with mothers from places as far away as Syracuse and New York City." The revelation that Genevieve's crimes extended far beyond what they had imagined brought a new dimension of urgency to the situation. They weren't just facing one cruel woman, but a complex criminal organization. "We have enough evidence now," Dr. Carterson said. "Witnesses, victims, families willing to talk. We can take this to the authorities." "And what if the authorities are also involved?" Beverly asked. Genevieve had enough influence to keep the scheme running for years. It was Estelle who offered the answer. "Then we take it to the public. Newspapers, television, social media, we make it impossible for any authority to ignore or cover up." "But that will expose our children," one of the adoptive mothers protested. "They will become the center of public attention. Our children have already been exposed to the worst kind of violence," Estelle replied firmly. "They were torn from their families, sold as objects, kept silent about real traumas. A little public attention is a small price to pay to ensure that this never happens again." The meeting turned into strategic planning. Each family assumed specific responsibilities. Dr. Carterson would contact investigative journalists. Alistair would use his business connections to pressure authorities. The biological mothers would prepare detailed testimonies about their experiences. But at the end of the night, when the families began to disperse, an uncomfortable truth remained. Genevieve was still free, still had resources and influence, and now knew that her victims were organizing against her. "She won't accept this passively," Mindy warned. "When she realizes that she has lost control of the narrative, she may do something desperate." "Like what?" Alistair asked. "Try to eliminate the evidence," Estelle replied grimly, "including the witnesses." That night, while Estelle rocked Carter and told stories to Serenity in the Cartersons' house, where everyone had decided to stay for mutual safety, the finally reunited family knew that the hardest battle was still to come. Genevieve Beaumont had built an empire based on the destruction of families. Now those same families, reunited and determined, were ready to destroy her empire. The next morning brought a discovery that completely changed the course of events. Dr. Carterson was awakened by an urgent call from an investigative journalist who had begun investigating Genevieve's crimes based on the information provided by the families. "Doctor, I need you to see this." said Carlos Mendez, a reporter for the local newspaper, his voice filled with urgency. Genevieve Beaumont doesn't exist. What do you mean she doesn't exist? Dr. Carterson asked, still trying to fully wake up. Her identity is false. We gained access to official records. The woman we know as Genevieve Beaumont is actually Sandra Oliveira, wanted by the federal police for 5 years for similar crimes in other states. The revelation hit the group like a bomb. Alistair, who had woken up with the commotion in the house, overheard the phone conversation in shock. That means I was never married to Genevieve, he murmured. I was married to a criminal who was using a false identity. Estelle, who was feeding Carter in the kitchen, raised her eyes. That explains a lot. She always avoided talking about her family, her past. She said she had lost her parents very young and didn't like to remember. And it means something more important, added Beverly. If her identity is false, then all the documents related to the adoptions are also false. That legally invalidates all guardianship transfers. Carlos Mendez continued the call, providing more disturbing details. We found evidence that Sandra operated similar schemes in New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia. In each city, she assumed a new identity, set up the operation, and when things got too hot, she simply disappeared. How many families were affected in total? Dr. Carterson asked. By our preliminary calculations, more than 50 children in the last 5 years, and there are records that she started this activity much longer ago. The magnitude of the crimes was astounding. Genevieve wasn't just a cruel woman who had committed a few criminal acts. She was a professional criminal who had made destroying families a lucrative career. There's more, Carlos continued. We managed to track some of the bank accounts she used. Sandra moved over $500,000 in the last 3 years in Cedar Creek alone. $500,000? Alistair repeated, horrified. She earned $500,000 selling babies? And that's just what we managed to track. There's probably much more money in accounts we haven't discovered yet. Serenity, who had been playing quietly with Clara on the living room floor, looked up. The bad woman is very, very bad, she observed, with the cutting simplicity of childhood. Yes, my dear, Estelle said, picking up her daughter, but now we know the truth about her, and that means we can stop her. Carlos Mendez asked to meet with the group that afternoon for a full interview. With the evidence we have and your testimonies, we can publish a story that will expose the entire operation. And Genevieve, Sandra, whatever her name is, where is she now? Alistair asked. Disappeared. The house where you lived is empty. The clinic was abruptly closed last night, and no one has seen her since then. The information brought relief and concern in equal measure. On one hand, Sandra was no longer actively operating in Cedar Creek. On the other hand, her escape meant that she was probably setting up a new operation elsewhere, ready to destroy more families. During the morning, more families victimized by Sandra appeared at the Cartersons' house. The news that people were organizing against her had spread through informal support networks, and mothers who had lost children began to break their silence. One of these mothers was Bethany Parker, a woman in her 30s who had lost twins to Sandra 2 years ago. Her story was particularly devastating. I was going through financial difficulties, she told the group gathered in the Cartersons' living room. I had just lost my job. I was about to be evicted. Sandra approached me, offering help. What kind of help? Estelle asked gently. She said she knew a rich couple who were willing to pay all my debts in exchange for adopting my babies. She said it would be an open adoption, that I could visit the children, that they would have a better life. And you accepted? Beverly asked without judgment in her voice. I was desperate. I had no food to give the boys. I had nowhere to live. Sandra made it seem like I would be saving my children instead of abandoning them. Bethany explained how Sandra had organized a fake guardianship transfer ceremony with documents that seemed legal but were completely false. When I tried to contact her a week later, wanting to know how my children were, I found out that the phone number she gave me didn't exist. "And did you try to seek help?" Dr. Carterson asked. "I tried. But when I went to the police, they said I had sold my children voluntarily and there was no crime. The documents Sandra had given me seemed to legitimize everything." Bethany's story revealed another cruel aspect of Sandra's scheme. She didn't just steal children, but manipulated vulnerable mothers to participate in their own victimization. "Where are your children now?" asked Serenity, who had listened to the whole story with serious attention. "I don't know," admitted Bethany, tears streaming down her face. "Sandra said they went to a family in New York City, but she may have lied about that too." Alistair stood up, a new determination shining in his eyes. "We're going to find your children, Bethany, and we're going to find all the other children Sandra stole." "How?" she asked, hope and skepticism fighting in her voice. "With the public exposure we're going to do today. When the story is published, other families will come forward. Adoptive parents who suspected irregularities, mothers who were deceived like you, maybe even employees who worked for Sandra and now want to redeem themselves." Carlos Mendez arrived that afternoon, accompanied by a film crew. The interview that followed was emotionally devastating, but also cathartic. One by one, the families told their stories. Mothers who had lost children, adoptive parents who discovered they had participated in crimes, children who carried fragmented memories of other lives. Serenity, despite her young age, was one of the most eloquent witnesses. "The bad woman separated families," she said, looking directly at the camera. "But now we've joined together to find all the children she hid." The story would be published the next morning, but Carlos warned that Sandra probably already knew she was being investigated. "Criminals like her have information networks. It's likely that she's already preparing to disappear again." It was then that Mindy arrived with news that changed everything. "Sandra didn't run," she announced, hurrying into the house. "She's gathering lawyers and preparing a counter-offensive." "What kind of counter-offensive?" Alistair asked. "She's claiming that you are all liars looking for money, that you are trying to blackmail rich families through false accusations. And worse, she's saying that the biological mothers sold their children voluntarily and now want to break legal contracts." Sandra's audacity was impressive. Even with her false identity discovered, even with evidence mounting against her, she still tried to control the narrative. "Does she have any chance of success with this strategy?" Dr. Carterson asked. "Unfortunately, yes," Mindy admitted. "She has money to hire expensive lawyers, and the legal system tends to protect people with resources. In addition, some of the couples who adopted through her are powerful people who may prefer to maintain the status quo." Estelle held Serenity and Carter tighter. "We're not going to let her win. Not after everything we've been through." "We're not," agreed Alistair, "but we need to be prepared for a long and difficult battle. Sandra has shown that she's a formidable adversary." That night, as the finally reunited family prepared to face the challenges ahead, a fundamental truth had been established. They were no longer alone. Other families, other survivors, other defenders of justice were on their side. And Sandra Oliveira, the woman who had built an empire based on people's loneliness and despair, was about to discover the power of families united by the determination to protect their children. The publication of the investigative story the next morning caused a seismic shock in Cedar Creek and neighboring towns. The headline screamed, "Horror Empire, criminals sold babies for years using false identity, and dozens of families destroyed by millionaire child trafficking scheme." Alistair woke up with the phone ringing incessantly. Journalists, authorities, desperate families, everyone wanted information, confirmations, answers. The Cartersons' house had become the unofficial center of an operation that grew every hour. 43 calls this morning alone, Dr. Carterson said, hanging up the phone for the umpteenth time. Families from 5 different states, all reporting similar cases involving a woman who matches Sandra's description. Estelle was in the kitchen with Serenity and Carter, trying to maintain a normal routine for the children amidst the chaos. But it was impossible to ignore the magnitude of what had been unleashed. "Mum, why are so many people wanting to talk to us?" Serenity asked, looking out the window where journalists gathered on the sidewalk. "Because our story helped other families understand what happened to them," Estelle explained patiently. Many mothers were alone and confused, thinking they were the only ones who had gone through this. One of the most significant calls came from New York City. A social worker named Mallory Thompson had recognized the pattern of crimes described in the story. "We have 7 cases here that fit perfectly," she reported to Dr. Carterson. A woman who presented herself as Dana Ferrer, operating a fertility clinic in the Upper East Side. The methods, the false documents, even the way she selected the victims, all identical. "And where is this Dana Ferrer now?" Dr. Carterson asked. "Disappeared 3 months ago, leaving several families in a desperate situation. But with your information, we were able to connect the cases, and now we have enough evidence for a federal investigation." The revelation that Sandra had operated in New York City using another name brought a national dimension to the case. It was no longer about local crimes, but about an interstate criminal operation that had affected hundreds of families. Dr. Carterson gathered the group in the living room to discuss the developments. "The federal police wants our official testimonies. They are setting up a special task force to investigate Sandra's entire network." "Is that good or bad for us?" Beverly asked. "It's good because it means we finally have serious authorities investigating the crimes. It's potentially bad because it could take months or years to resolve, and during that time, the children are in legal limbo." Bethany, who had spent the night at the Cartersons' house, spoke up. "I just want to know where my children are. I don't care how long it takes." It was then that an unexpected call changed everything. Mindy answered the phone and turned pale as she listened. "It was Sandra," she announced when she hung up. "She wants to meet with us." The silence that followed was tense and fraught with dangerous possibilities. "Meet where?" Alistair asked. "In a public place this afternoon. She says she wants to clarify misunderstandings and find a solution that benefits everyone." "It's a trap," Beverly said immediately. "She must be desperate and planning something." "Or," Estelle said thoughtfully, "she realized she lost and wants to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Dr. Carterson asked. "Information about where all the children are in exchange for some kind of legal agreement." The possibility was tempting, but risky. If Sandra really had information about dozens of missing children, a meeting with her could reunite families who had been separated for years, but it could also be an attempt to eliminate the main witnesses against her. "We're not going alone," Alistair decided. "If we go, it will be with protection in a totally public place, with authorities aware." "And the children stay here," added Estelle firmly. "I'm not going to expose Serenity and Carter to that woman again." The meeting was scheduled for the City Mall, a busy location where it would be impossible for Sandra to attempt any kind of violence. Dr. Carterson contacted the federal police, who agreed to maintain discreet surveillance during the meeting. At 3 in the afternoon, Alistair, Estelle, Dr. Carterson and Beverly headed to the agreed location. Sandra was already there, sitting at a food court table, looking strangely calm for someone whose life was falling apart. "Alistair," she said as they approached, "it's good to see you, and Estelle, we finally meet in person." The naturalness with which Sandra addressed them was disturbing. There were no signs of regret or nervousness, just the cold confidence of someone accustomed to manipulating situations. "Do you have something to tell us?" Alistair asked directly. "I have a proposal," Sandra replied, gesturing for them to sit down. "You stop this smear campaign. I provide information about where to find the children you're looking for." "Smear campaign," Estelle repeated with disbelief. "You stole my children." "I facilitated adoptions for families who couldn't have children by conventional means," Sandra corrected with a cold smile. I offered solutions to complex problems. Solutions that involved falsifying documents and hospitalizing mothers against their will, Dr. Carterson said. Administrative details, Sandra said dismissively. The important thing is that children found loving homes and families fulfilled their dreams. Sandra's complete lack of remorse left everyone momentarily speechless. She genuinely didn't see her crimes as crimes, but as a service she provided to society. Where are Bethany's children? Estelle asked directly. Sandra smiled. That information has value. Like all the information I have. What kind of agreement are you proposing? Alistair asked, although he already suspected the answer. You drop the charges, publicly declare that there were misunderstandings, and I provide a complete list of all the children and their current locations. Everyone wins. Except justice, Dr. Carterson said. Justice is subjective, Sandra replied. What matters are the practical results. It was then that Beverly asked a question that changed the course of the conversation. Why did you do this, Sandra? Why did you choose to destroy families? For the first time, Sandra's mask of confidence wavered slightly. You don't understand how the real world works. There are families who can't take care of children and families who desperately want children. I just connected those needs. Lying, deceiving, stealing, added Estelle. Doing what was necessary to solve problems that the legal system is incompetent to solve, Sandra corrected. Alistair leaned forward. And the money? The millions you earned from this? Fair compensation for the service provided and the risks assumed. The conversation was clearly reaching a stalemate. Sandra showed no genuine regret, and the group wasn't willing to make deals with an unrepentant criminal. There's another option, Sandra said, when she realized that her proposal would be rejected. You can continue with this moral crusade, but I disappear again, and all the information I have about the children disappears with me. The threat was delivered with the coldness of someone accustomed to using the suffering of others as a bargaining chip. How many children? Estelle asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. Over the years, more than 100. In the last 5 years alone, 73 children have passed through my operations. The number was devastating. 73 families destroyed, 73 children torn from their biological mothers. And you have information about all of them. I keep meticulous records, current location, names of adoptive families, even recent photographs in some cases. Dr. Carterson realized the cruel trap that Sandra had created. If they arrested her, the information about the children could be lost forever. If they made a deal with her, they would be allowing a criminal to escape justice. We need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Sandra replied, standing up. But not much time. If you decide to continue with the accusations, I simply disappear tomorrow. And the 73 families that could be reunited will remain separated forever. As Sandra walked away, she left the group in an impossible moral dilemma. Choose between justice for past crimes and hope for families still separated. What do we do now? Beverly asked. We find a third option, Alistair replied with determination. One that allows us to have both justice and information. That night, as they planned a strategy that could save dozens of families without allowing Sandra to escape, they didn't know that the real twist was yet to come. The third option that Alistair had mentioned came from an unexpected source. The morning after the meeting with Sandra, Mindy arrived at the Cartersons' house, accompanied by an unknown woman, a lawyer specializing in children's rights named Ms. Ellis Porter. Ms. Porter has worked on similar cases, Mindy explained. She has a proposal that may solve our dilemma. Ms. Porter was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a presence that radiated competence and determination. She had spent the night studying all the documents in the case after being contacted by the federal police. Your situation is unique, she began, sitting in the living room, where the group waited anxiously. Sandra is using the information about the children as a bargaining chip, but there are legal precedents for situations like this. What kind of precedents? Dr. Carterson asked. We can offer Sandra a plea bargain. She provides all the information about the children and fully cooperates with the investigations, and in exchange receives a significant reduction in her sentence, but not total impunity. Alistair frowned. That means she would escape prison? No. It means that instead of spending the rest of her life in jail, she would serve a shorter sentence, probably between 10 and 15 years. The important thing is that the information about the children would be preserved and the families could be reunited. Estelle, who was holding Serenity, spoke up. And if she lies, if she provides false information, that's why cooperation needs to be verifiable, Ms. Porter explained. Every piece of information she provides will be checked. If we discover lies or omissions, the agreement is cancelled and she faces the maximum penalty. The proposal had logic, but there was still emotional resistance. After everything Sandra had done, the idea of any kind of agreement seemed like a betrayal to the victims. It was Serenity who, with the simple wisdom of childhood, offered a perspective that changed the discussion. If the bad woman tells where all the children are, she said, then all the mothers can have their babies back. Isn't that more important than punishing her? The question touched on the heart of the matter. Was it about revenge or about healing? About punishing Sandra or about reuniting families? The girl is right, said Bethany, who had arrived early to follow the developments. I'd rather know where my children are than know that Sandra is suffering in prison. Dr. Carterson nodded slowly. And legally, 15 years is a significant sentence. She won't escape the consequences, just receive consequences proportionate to her cooperation. The decision was made unanimously. Ms. Porter would contact the federal police to formalize the plea bargain proposal, and Sandra would be presented with the offer that afternoon. But when the federal investigators went to look for Sandra at the hotel where she was staying, they discovered that she had disappeared during the early morning. Her belongings were still in the room, but she had simply vanished. She must have realized we were preparing a legal trap, said Federal Agent Mark Sanders during an emergency meeting at the Cartersons' house. Experienced criminals like her develop instincts to detect when the walls are closing in. The news brought renewed despair to the families. It seemed that Sandra had escaped again, taking with her the information about dozens of lost children. It was then that something happened that no one expected. Carlos Mendez, the journalist who had published the original story, came running to the house with an expression of urgency and excitement. "You need to see this," he said, holding out a sealed letter. "Someone left this at the newspaper reception this morning with specific instructions to deliver it to you." Alistair opened the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was precise and formal, clearly Sandra's. "If you are reading this," the letter said, "it is because I have decided that it is time to close this chapter of my life. For years, I built a business based on the premise that I was solving problems, connecting children who needed homes with families who needed children. But yesterday's meeting made me realize something that I had ignored, the real human cost of what I did." The group read in silence, surprised by the change of tone from the woman who had shown herself to be unrepentant the day before. "I will not surrender to the authorities," the letter continued, "because I do not trust the system to give me fair treatment. But I can no longer carry the weight of 73 families destroyed by my ambition." Dr. Carterson turned the page, finding something that made his heart race. A detailed list with names, addresses, and information about all the children that Sandra had moved over the years. "She provided everything," he whispered. "Children's names, adoptive families, even recent photographs." "Why?" Carmela asked. "Why would she do this without receiving anything in return?" The answer was on the last page of the letter, because a 4-year-old asked me a question yesterday that I couldn't answer. She asked if it was more important to reunite families or punish those who separated them. I didn't know the answer, but now I know. Families are more important. The letter was signed with the words, "For Serenity," who reminded me that some things are more important than money. Sandra Oliveira. Serenity, who had listened to the reading of the letter, looked at the adults around her. Did the bad woman decide to do the right thing? It seems so, my dear, Estelle replied, hugging her daughter. You helped her remember how to be a better person. The months that followed were of emotional family reunions and careful reconstruction. With the information provided by Sandra, the federal police managed to locate 68 of the 73 children listed. Some had been adopted by genuinely loving families who were unaware of the criminal origin of the adoptions, creating complex situations that required careful mediation. Bethany was reunited with her twins, now 4 years old, who had been adopted by a family in Hartford, Connecticut. The meeting was supervised by specialized psychologists, and gradually a shared custody was established, allowing the children to maintain ties with both families. Other stories had varied endings. Some biological mothers decided that their children were better off with the adoptive families and opted for extended family relationships. Others managed to regain full custody. Many found creative solutions that honored both the biological and emotional bonds created during the separation. For Alistair, Estelle, Serenity, and Carter, the resolution of the case brought a possibility that none of them had initially imagined. Alistair, who had genuinely loved Carter as a son, discovered that his affection for the child did not diminish upon learning that he was not biologically his. Family isn't about blood, he told Estelle on a sunny afternoon, 6 months after the end of the investigation. It's about choosing to love and care for someone every day. Estelle smiled, watching Serenity teach Carter to draw birds in the yard of the simple house they had bought on the outskirts of Cedar Creek. A house where there were no dark secrets, just genuine and transparent love. Alistair, she said, can I ask you a question? Of course. Would you like to be a real father? Not through lies or false documents, but through genuine choice? The proposal surprised Alistair, but when he looked at the small family they had built, a family born of extraordinary circumstances, but held together by true love, the answer was simple. I would love to, he replied. Serenity, who had overheard the conversation, ran to them with Carter wobbling behind her. Does that mean we're going to be a real family forever? She asked, her eyes shining with the hope that had sustained her through all the difficult moments. Forever, confirmed Alistair, picking her up. And no one else will try to separate us? Never again, promised Estelle, hugging her 2 children. That afternoon, as the sun set over Cedar Creek, 4 people who had met in the most improbable of circumstances silently celebrated the most important victory of all, the discovery that true family is the one we choose to protect, regardless of how it forms. Sandra Oliveira was never found by the authorities, but the information she provided continued to reunite families for months. Her final letter had been her only positive contribution to the lives she had touched, but it was enough to repair much of the damage she had caused. And in a yellow house on the outskirts of town, a girl who had spent 2 years on the streets finally found what she had always sought, a place where she was loved unconditionally, where she could take care of her little brother, where she could draw free birds flying in endless blue skies. The story that had begun with a devastating flood ended with a family rebuilt, not as it was before, but as something new and stronger, shaped by adversity and cemented by true love. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.